June 3, 1944, Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. She stepped down from the military truck with one thought pressing against everything else. This is where things get worse. The ride had been long and silent. Dust clung to her shoes, her skirt, the hem of her jacket. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for weeks, how to lower her eyes, how to keep her shoulders tight, how not to react when the shouting began. She had prepared herself for barking orders for rifles held too close for the look that stripped a person down to a uniform and nothing more. But the shouting did not come. The first thing she saw was a man in a cowboy hat. He stood slightly off to the side of the gate, not blocking the path, not rushing forward. He wasn't holding a rifle. One hand rested casually on a wooden fence rail, the kind she had only seen in pictures, weathered boards splintered in places, built to last rather than impress. When the truck rolled to a stop, he took off his hat. Not sharply, not like a drill command. He simply lifted it slow and unremarkable, as if greeting women arriving at a county fair instead of enemy prisoners stepping onto American soil. She stopped moving. For a fraction of a second, the world failed to line up with what she knew. The image did not match the instructions drilled into her since the war began. There was no place for this gesture in the stories she had been told. No chapter that explained why an American guard would stand bareheaded in the sun, squinting slightly, waiting for them to climb down safely. She felt heat rise in her face, not from the Arkansas sun, but from confusion. Behind her, another woman hesitated, bumping lightly into her back. Someone whispered something in German too low to make out. She did not turn around. Her eyes stayed on the man by the fence. He was tall, though not in a way that seemed deliberate. Long-limbed, lean, built by work rather than training. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, forearms browned and marked by old scratches. Dust clung to his boots as if he belonged to the ground beneath him. There was nothing polished about him, nothing theatrical. He looked at them. Not coldly, not warmly, but with the same expression she had seen on farmers back home when a storm threatened the fields. Measured, appraising, practical. As if the question in his mind was not, "Who are these enemies?" but "How are we going to get all of them through this gate without trouble?" She stepped down from the truck more slowly than the others. The metal rung was hot beneath her hand. She expected, still for the moment, to snap into place, for a voice to rise and correct her posture, for the illusion of calm to break. It did not. The man shifted his weight, letting another soldier pass behind him with a clipboard. He glanced briefly at the line forming, then back at her, and nodded once. Not approval. Not permission. Just acknowledgement. It unsettled her more than shouting would have. She had been taught that American men were careless and crude, softened by comfort, dangerous because they lacked discipline. The man in front of her looked none of those things. He looked ordinary, the kind of man who might fix a fence before breakfast, eat quickly, then move on to the next task without thinking much about it. That ordinariness struck her like a blow. She crossed the last step and stood on the packed dirt, unsure where to place her feet. The camp stretched beyond the gate rows of low buildings, open space, the sound of cicadas humming in the distance. No looming walls, no looming silence. Life moved around them as if this arrival were only one more task in a long day. The cowboy replaced his hat and turned slightly, gesturing with two fingers toward the open path. No words, just a small motion, economical and clear. She obeyed before she realized she had done so. As she walked past him, close enough to smell leather and sun-warmed cloth, she waited for something to happen. A remark, a glance that lingered too long, a reminder that she was an enemy. Nothing came. He did not watch her pass. His attention shifted to the next woman climbing down, ready to catch her if she slipped. The thought startled her, catch her, and she pushed it away, but it lingered all the same. Inside her chest, something loosened just slightly, like a knot that had been pulled too tight for too long. This was not how fear was supposed to look. She moved with the group through the gate, aware of every sound, boots on dirt, the quiet murmur of English. She did not fully understand the creak of the fence as it swung back into place. She told herself to remember this moment clearly, to store it away as proof that appearances could deceive. Still, as she walked deeper into Fort Chaffee, one thought kept returning, unwanted and persistent. If this man was the enemy, then she had been taught to fear the wrong things. The shock did not fade once they passed the gate. It followed her, quiet and persistent, settling into her thoughts as the day unfolded. The man in the cowboy hat was assigned to them for the first week. Not as a guard in the way she understood guards, but as something closer to a guide. He stayed at the edge of the group, never in the middle, never pressing too close. When they stopped, he stopped. When they moved, he walked a few steps ahead, turning back just often enough to make sure no one lagged behind. He spoke little. When he did, it was slow, deliberate, English stripped of decoration. Most of the time he used his hands instead, pointing toward a building, tapping a gate post, making a small circling motion to signal waiting. There was no shouting, no rush to assert control. That, more than anything, made her uneasy. She watched him the way one learns to watch animals in unfamiliar territory. The way his hand rested on the latch before opening a gate. The way he positioned himself slightly to the side so the women could pass first. The way his eyes moved, not scanning faces, not lingering, but checking feet, spacing the ground ahead. Most unsettling of all was what he did not do. He did not stare. In the years before her capture, she had learned to expect eyes measuring, judging, claiming. She had learned to make herself smaller beneath them. The absence of that pressure left her with nowhere to brace herself. At the water station that afternoon, she filled her bucket too quickly. The handle slipped from her fingers, clanging against the metal rim. Water sloshed onto the dirt, darkening it in a spreading stain. Before she could react, the cowboy bent down. Her body moved faster than her mind. She stepped back sharply, breath caught in her throat, hands raised defensively. For a split second, she saw the moment the way she had been trained to see it, the beginning of punishment, the tightening of control. He froze, not just paused, stopped completely. He straightened, took a full step backward, and lifted both hands' palms out the way men did when they meant to show they posed no threat. "Easy," he said, his voice calm, almost light. "I ain't gonna arrest the bucket." The words made no sense to her. The tone did. A few of the women behind her let out quiet, surprised laughs. Not loud, not reckless. The kind of laughter that slipped out before it could be swallowed. She did not laugh. She stood there, heart racing, trying to understand what had just happened. She had flinched. He had adjusted. The balance of power, which she had expected to be rigid and unforgiving, had shifted, if only slightly, in her direction. That frightened her more than if he had barked an order. He picked up the bucket only after she nodded, careful not to move until she had stepped aside. When he handed it back, he did not touch her fingers. He did not look at her face. He simply returned the handle and turned away as if nothing unusual had occurred, as if her fear had been acceptable. The rest of the day passed in small, controlled tasks, carrying supplies, standing in line, learning where not to go. The camp functioned with a rhythm she did not recognize, steady, predictable, almost indifferent to their presence. Guards changed shifts. Trucks came and went. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played faintly its music, swallowed by the heat. She kept waiting for the patience to run out. It did not. That night, lying on her bunk, she replayed the moment with the bucket again and again. The way he had stepped back. The way his voice had softened instead of hardened. She searched it for deception, for the hidden lesson she must have missed. If this was a trap, she reasoned it was the most elaborate one she had ever seen. In the days that followed, she noticed patterns. The cowboy never rushed them, but he never allowed disorder either. When someone hesitated too long, he waited. When someone strayed, he redirected with a gesture, not a shout. He treated mistakes as inconveniences, not offenses. Once, when another woman whispered too loudly in German, she expected reprimand. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said, almost apologetically, "Can't understand you if you're all talking at once." The words landed oddly, not as a warning, as a request. She began to understand something unsettling. This man did not need fear to do his job. That realization opened a deeper unease. If he did not rely on intimidation, then his authority came from somewhere else, from confidence, from certainty, from a system that did not feel threatened by a handful of exhausted women in borrowed uniforms. It forced her to confront a thought she had been taught to reject. What if they had been lied to? The idea felt dangerous, almost disloyal, even now. Yet it crept in during the quiet moments when the camp settled and the cicadas took over the air. She thought of the stories she had heard of American brutality, of chaos disguised as freedom. She tried to align those images with the man who waited for them to drink before closing the gate, who checked the ground for loose boards so no one would trip. The two did not fit. Her fear did not vanish. It sharpened, refined itself into something more precise. She no longer feared immediate harm. She feared confusion. She feared the slow unraveling of what she believed she understood about the world. On the fourth day, as they walked back from a work detail, she caught herself glancing toward him without meaning to. He was explaining something to another guard, his hands moving in a loose, practiced way. He laughed briefly, one short sound gone almost as soon as it appeared. The sound startled her. She realized then that she had not heard an American laugh since her capture. Not the sharp bark of mockery she had expected, but something unguarded, unforced. That night she did not sleep easily. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the camp boots on gravel. A truck engine turning over, the low murmur of voices. She told herself to remain cautious, to remember that kindness could be a tool like any other. Still, one question would not leave her alone. If this was all an act, then why did it feel so unnecessary? Why waste patience on people who no longer mattered? Why bother with restraint when victory had already been secured? She turned onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, and tried to push the thoughts away. Fear, she reminded herself, was safer than hope. But somewhere in the darkness, a quieter realization took shape, one she was not yet ready to accept. Whatever awaited her in this place, it was not going to be simple, and that more than anything made her afraid. The morning began the way the others had, quietly, without ceremony, but something in the air felt different. She noticed it before she could name it. The camp was awake earlier than usual. Boots moved with purpose. Doors opened and closed. The low hum of voices carried across the yard, not sharp or urgent, but steady routine. Whatever was coming, it was not a drill. It was simply the next thing. They were led toward the dining hall in loose lines. The same cowboy walked ahead of them, hat on shoulders, relaxed, moving at a pace that did not force anyone to hurry. She watched his back, the easy confidence in his stride, and wondered, can how a man like this fit into the stories she had been told? When the doors opened, the smell reached her first. It stopped her. Eggs. Real eggs. The faint richness of butter melting on hot metal. Coffee strong, unmistakable, cutting through the air with a bitterness that felt almost luxurious. Bread toasted just enough to color the edges. The scent was not overwhelming. It was familiar. That made it worse. She hesitated at the threshold, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. For a moment, she was no longer in Arkansas. She was somewhere else entirely, standing in a kitchen that no longer existed, listening to pans clink, watching steam rise on an ordinary morning before the world had learned to ration everything that mattered. The line moved forward. She moved with it. Inside, long wooden tables filled the room. Nothing ornate, nothing excessive. Just enough space, enough order, enough light coming through the windows to make the dust in the air visible. American soldiers stood in the same line, trays in hand, waiting their turn. There was no separate area, no raised platform, no sign that this meal was meant to make a point. That unsettled her again. The food was placed on her tray without comment. Eggs, bread, a small square of butter wrapped in paper, a metal cup filled with coffee steam curling at the rim. The portion was generous, more than she had eaten in months, perhaps years. Across the room, an older woman struggled with her chair. Before she could react, a young American soldier stepped forward, pulled the chair back gently and guided it under the table. He did not smile. He did not wait. He returned to his seat and began eating as if nothing unusual had occurred. No one watched. No one stood by to see how they would respond. No one demanded acknowledgement. The act passed unnoticed, absorbed into the rhythm of the room. She sat down slowly, her tray heavy in her hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of forks against plates filled the space. Coffee was poured. Bread was broken in half. Somewhere near the back, a soldier laughed at something another said quietly without drawing attention. She lifted her fork and stopped. This was not a feast. That was the strangest part. The food was good, plentiful, but not extravagant. It was the kind of meal meant to fuel a day's work, not to impress. The kind of breakfast that assumed tomorrow would come and the day after that, too. She ate carefully at first, waiting for the catch, waiting for the portion to be taken away, waiting for the rules to change. They did not. Across from her, an American soldier wiped his hands on a napkin and reached for more bread. He ate with the same ease she remembered from long ago, without counting bites, without calculating what might be left for later. He drank his coffee down to the bottom and refilled it without asking permission. She realized then that this was not generosity in the way she had been taught to understand it. No one was sacrificing for them. No one was going without so they could eat. There was simply enough. That realization landed heavily. She thought of letters she had not yet received but already feared, the ones that spoke of thin soups and empty shelves of meals stretched beyond reason. She thought of how food had become a measure of worth, of loyalty, of survival. And here in the heart of the enemy's country she was eating the same breakfast as the men who guarded her. Not better. Not worse. The same. The cowboy passed by the table once, checking something on a clipboard. He did not stop. He did not look at their plates. He did not measure how much they ate. His concern, it seemed, lay elsewhere, timing logistics, the smooth movement of the morning. When she looked up again, he was gone. That absence stayed with her longer than his presence ever had. By the time they finished, the tension she had carried into the room had loosened, replaced by something quieter and more dangerous. She felt full, not just in body, but in a way she did not trust yet. As they stood to leave, she noticed something else. No one said thank you. Not because they were ungrateful, but because there had been no invitation to perform gratitude. The Americans did not linger. They cleared their trays. They moved on to the next task. The meal was not a transaction. It was procedure. Outside, the sun had risen higher. The camp resumed its steady rhythm. Work details were assigned. Gates opened and closed. Life continued. She walked with the others, her stomach warm, her thoughts unsettled. This was not softness. She understood that now. Softness would have required reassurance applause, some sign of moral display. What she had seen instead was something far more unsettling, a system that functioned without needing her reaction. A country so confident in its capacity that it could afford to be unremarkable about it. That night, lying on her bunk, she stared at the ceiling and tried to categorize what she had experienced. She searched for the proper word, mercy, generosity, restraint, but none of them fit exactly. Those words implied choice. This felt inevitable, as if the machinery of this place had been built long before she arrived and would continue long after she left, indifferent to her presence, but unwilling to strip her of dignity simply because it could. She thought of the cowboy, of the way he had guided them without spectacle, of how little he seemed to require from them in return. She thought of the soldiers at the table, eating without ceremony, assuming the world would hold together because it always had for them. For the first time since her capture, she allowed herself a dangerous thought. Perhaps this was not an exception. Perhaps this was how things were done here. And if that was true, then the stories she had been told were not just exaggerated. They were built on something that did not exist at all. Work on the ranch began before sunrise. She had never been close to animals that large. Chickens, she understood. Goats, perhaps. Horses existed to her as symbol, painted in books, marching in parades, harnessed and controlled. The one assigned to her that morning made it clear within seconds that symbols had little to do with reality. The horse stood patiently while the cowboy adjusted the saddle, one hip-cocked tail flicking lazily. Its calm felt deceptive. When he stepped aside and motioned for her to mount, she hesitated, measuring the distance, the height, the unfamiliar weight of everything involved. He noticed, but did not rush her. He demonstrated once slowly, swinging up with a practiced ease that made the movement look simple. Then he slid back down and nodded for her to try. She placed her foot in the stirrup, gripping the leather with more force than necessary. The saddle creaked beneath her weight. She pushed up awkwardly, her balance already wrong. The horse took a step. Not sharply, not maliciously, just enough. Her foot slipped. Her body followed. She slid sideways and landed on the ground in a small cloud of dust, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Behind her, she heard him turn. He had been facing the gate, checking something with another hand, and missed the fall itself. But he heard the sound, the unmistakable thump of body meeting earth. He spun around, alarm flashing across his face. For half a second he saw what he expected an injured woman, a mistake that would turn into paperwork, questions, consequences. Instead, he saw her sitting on the ground, legs folded beneath her dust, clinging to her skirt, her face burning red with humiliation. The horse stood nearby, unbothered, ears flicking as if nothing of importance had occurred. They stared at each other. The moment stretched. The ranch seemed to hold its breath with them, the low creak of the fence, the distant sound of another horse stamping, the hum of insects already warming in the early light. Then he cleared his throat. "Well," he said very seriously, "horse didn't like your accent." The words hung between them, absurd and unexpected. She blinked. The logic of the sentence did not matter. The tone did. It was not mocking, not dismissive. It was offered the way one offered a plank across a gaypan invitation to step somewhere safer. Something inside her loosened. She looked down at her dust-covered hands, then back up at him and laughed. It surprised her more than anyone. The sound came out too fast, too bright. It caught in her chest for a moment before breaking free. It was not careful or controlled. It did not belong to a prisoner or even to a survivor. It belonged to a woman in her 20s who had just been outwitted by a horse. He froze when he heard it. Not because he disapproved, because he had not expected it either. For an instant, neither of them knew what to do with the sound that now filled the space between them. It was too human, too ordinary. It changed the shape of the morning. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking away briefly as if embarrassed by his own success. "Guess well, try that again," he said, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it. He pulled her up easily, careful not to rush, careful not to draw attention to how light she felt. When she was steady again, he dusted off the saddle with one hand and adjusted the stirrup without comment. This time, he stood closer. Not touching, just near enough that she could feel the solidity of him beside her. When she mounted again, the horse stayed still. She sat stiffly, holding the reins too tight. "There you go," he said quietly. "Don't argue with her. Shall win." She nodded, still smiling despite herself. From that moment on, something changed. It was not trust, not yet. It was an easing, a thinning of the tension that had wrapped every interaction in sharp edges. They spoke little, but the silences between them felt different. Less heavy, less dangerous. She learned that the horse ignored force but responded to patience. He learned that she listened, closely absorbed instruction quickly, and took her mistakes seriously. When she succeeded, he acknowledged it with a nod. When she failed, he corrected her without spectacle. Once, when she managed a full circuit of the corral without incident, he tipped his hat at her in exaggerated solemnity. She rolled her eyes and laughed again, softer this time. They were careful, both of them. He did not linger. She did not ask questions. Whatever existed between them stayed contained within the boundaries of work, how to hold the reins, how to shift weight, how to read the animal beneath her. Yet the tension did not disappear. It changed shape. She became aware of him in new ways, the steadiness of his presence, the way his voice dropped when he focused, the way he stepped back when she dismounted, always giving her space. She noticed how often he watched the ground, rather than her face, how he corrected himself mid-step if he realized he was too close. He in turn noticed her silences. The moments when her laughter faded too quickly, the way she stiffened at sudden noises even here far from the front. He did not comment. He did not ask. One afternoon as they worked near the fence line, she caught him glancing at her, his expression unreadable. When she looked back, he turned away immediately as if caught doing something he had no right to do. Neither spoke of it. At the end of the day, as they led the horses back to the stable, she realized something that unsettled her again, not with fear this time, but with awareness. She had stopped counting the hours. She had stopped waiting for the moment to end. The laughter had done that. It had broken the time into something livable, something that did not require constant vigilance. That frightened her even as it warmed her. As the sun dipped low, he tied off the reins and stepped aside. "You did good today," he said, simple and direct. She nodded, unsure what to do with the praise. As she walked back toward the camp with the others, she glanced over her shoulder once. He was already turning to the next task, attention shifting easily, the morning's moment folded away as if it were no more significant than a fence repaired or a gate closed. That she realized was part of what made it real. It was not a performance, not a story meant to be remembered. It was just a day that had gone differently than she expected. That night, lying awake, she touched the bruise forming on her hip and smiled faintly into the darkness. The sound of her own laughter replayed in her mind, unfamiliar and fragile. For the first time since her capture, she felt something like anticipation. Not hope. Not yet. Just the quiet, cautious understanding that tomorrow might hold another moment she could not predict and that she might survive it without fear. Between her and the cowboy, an unspoken agreement had taken shape. They would proceed carefully. But they would proceed. The letter arrived in the middle of the afternoon, folded thin, its edges softened by too many hands. Mail days always carried a strange tension, but this one felt heavier from the start. The women gathered quietly, names called one by one. Some letters brought relief, others brought silence. When her name was spoken, she felt a tightening in her chest she could not explain. She carried the envelope away from the others, turning it over once before opening it. The handwriting was familiar, older, careful, uneven where the pen had pressed too hard. The words inside were worse than she expected. The house was gone, not damaged. Gone. A direct hit during the winter raids. The street no longer existed in any way that mattered. Neighbors had scattered or vanished. Food was scarce. What could be found was stretched thin, watered down, shared between too many mouths. People spoke less now, conserving energy. The city burned quietly, not in flames, but in exhaustion. There was no drama in the letter. No crying ink. Just statements arranged with the discipline of someone trying to make the truth bearable. She folded the paper carefully, hands steady despite the noise in her head. The ranch work that day felt heavier than usual. The sun pressed down, unrelenting. The dust clung to her skin, her hair, the back of her throat. She moved through her tasks mechanically driven by habit rather than attention. The cowboy noticed. He did not ask what was wrong. He noticed the way she slowed near the fence, the way her grip faltered as she lifted the boards. When the day stretched longer than expected, when the work did not end where it usually did, he adjusted without comment. They finished late. As they walked back, he reached into his pocket and broke a piece of bread in half. The loaf was plain, wrapped in paper, clearly meant for his own meal. He held one half out to her. "Long day," he said. She stared at the bread. The timing was unbearable. That morning she had read of hunger so constant it no longer surprised anyone. That afternoon, she stood in the dust of Arkansas, offered food by the man she was supposed to hate. She took it. The warmth of it in her hands, real, immediate, and did something she had been holding together with care. They stood there side by side, chewing quietly. The field stretched out in front of them wide and open, indifferent to borders and flags. Cicadas buzzed in the distance. Somewhere, a truck engine started and died again. She stopped walking. Her voice, when it came, was unsteady. "Why you do this?" The English felt heavy in her mouth, shaped carefully like something fragile she might drop if she rushed. She did not look at him when she asked. She watched the ground instead, as if the answer might be safer there. He did not respond immediately. He stood still, eyes on the horizon, chewing the last of his bread. The pause stretched longer than she expected, long enough for her to regret the question, long enough for the old fear to stir again. Then he swallowed and spoke. "Because work's hard," he said, "and people get hungry. That was all. No speech, no explanation, no mention of war or right and wrong, no insistence that she understand anything beyond the obvious. The simplicity of it struck her harder than any accusation could have. Because if that was the truth, if his kindness required no justification beyond the physical facts of the world, then everything she had been taught to believe collapsed inward. There was no room in that answer for ideology, no space for hatred. It did not depend on who she was, where she came from, or what uniform she had once worn. It was not conditional. Work was hard. People got hungry. That was enough. She nodded once, unable to speak. They finished the walk, back in silence, the space between them filled with something too heavy to name. That night she went to the camp bathhouse alone. The water ran warm, steady, carrying away the dust and sweat of the day. She stood beneath it longer than necessary, letting it soak into her shoulders, her back, her hands. The soap smelled faintly of something clean and neutral, nothing like the sharp substitutes she remembered from home. As the water beat down, the letter replayed in her mind. The ruined house. The empty streets. The careful words chosen to hide desperation. And then, layered over, that the image of the cowboy breaking his bread without thinking twice. The two images refused to coexist peacefully. She pressed her forehead against the cool tile and felt the tears come not all at once, but steadily, quietly. She did not sob. She did not make a sound. The water carried everything away, giving her the privacy she did not know she needed. She cried not because she had been treated badly. She cried because she could no longer hate him the way she had been taught. That realization felt like betrayal, to her past, to the dead, to the country she had believed she was serving. Hatred had been a structure, something solid to stand on when the world made no sense. Without it, she felt exposed. And yet beneath the grief and confusion there was something else. Relief. The war had demanded that everyone choose sides, reduce themselves to roles, compress their humanity into slogans. Here in this place that compression was loosening. Not because anyone had ordered it to, but because the people around her no longer required it. She thought of the cowboy again, his quiet competence, his refusal to dramatize what he did, his complete lack of interest in being seen as anything more than a man doing his job. This, she realized, was what frightened her most. Not his power, not his authority, his normalcy. A country that could produce men like this men who did not need cruelty to feel strong men who shared bread without expecting gratitude was not the caricature she had been warned about. It was something else entirely. She dried her face carefully before leaving the bathhouse. Outside, the camp had settled into its evening rhythm. Lights glowed softly in the barracks. Voices drifted unhurried. Somewhere nearby, laughter rose briefly and faded. She lay down on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, the letter folded neatly beneath her pillow. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to think not about surviving the days ahead, but about what they meant. If this was America, if this quiet, unremarkable decency was not an exception, but a reflection of something deeper, then the war had been lost long before the first bombs fell. Not on the battlefield, but in the way people were taught to see each other. As sleep finally came, one thought settled over her, heavy and inescapable. She could no longer reconcile the man she worked beside with the enemy she had been told to fear. And in that fracture, something inside her broke open not into despair, but into a painful, undeniable clarity. The days that followed did not soften, they clarified. After the letter, after the tears, she had not known how to stop. She expected something to shift between them, to tilt toward questions, explanations, perhaps even caution. She expected him to notice the change in her, the way grief had rearranged her movements, the way her eyes lingered on things she had once ignored. He did notice. He simply did not ask. He did not ask about her past. He did not ask what she believed. He did not ask what uniform she had worn, or what songs she had been taught to sing, or whether she still loved the country that had collapsed behind her. Instead, each morning began the same way. "Fence line first," he said, once glancing at the sky. Storm might roll in. Another day, waters low by the south gate. Horse'll need more before noon. Sometimes he said nothing at all. He handed her gloves. He checked the latch. He moved on. At first, she found this infuriating. She had been prepared to defend herself, to explain, to justify. She had rehearsed arguments she did not yet believe in fully, but felt obligated to carry. She had been ready to be judged. He gave her none of that. In the absence of interrogation, something unexpected happened. Her thoughts stopped circling. Without pressure, they began to settle into place on their own. She started to see him not as a representative of anything, but as himself. He worked until the work was done. When rain came, he adapted. When a board split, he replaced it. When a horse grew restless, he adjusted the schedule rather than forcing the animal to comply. Nothing about his authority was loud. Nothing needed to be proven. She realized one afternoon as they repaired a section of fence together that she had never seen him angry. Tired, yes. Focused. Occasionally frustrated. But never angry in the way she recognized from the war, the anger that fed on humiliation, that demanded submission. His strength did not come from command. It came from certainty, from knowing what needed to be done and doing it without spectacle or resentment. That was when she understood. Power, as she had known, it had always been brittle. It required reinforcements. Imbles, slogans, enemies. It needed constant reminders to keep people aligned. His did not. He did not need her agreement. He did not need her conversion. He did not even need her gratitude. By refusing to argue with her beliefs, he made them strangely irrelevant. And in that space, something she had guarded carefully began to grow. It did not announce itself. It arrived quietly in the accumulation of ordinary moments. The way he handed her tools without looking. The way he waited for her to finish speaking even when her English slowed the day. The way he stood beside her during sudden thunder, saying nothing, simply sharing the pause. They did not speak of affection. But it was there. She felt it in the way her attention tracked him across the field without conscious effort. In the way his presence steadied her even when he was silent. In the way laughter. Ray careful found them more often now, slipping into the edges of the day. One evening, as they walked back after finishing late, the sky deepening into purple and gold, he mentioned that repatriation lists were being finalized. "Won't be long now," he said, not looking at her. The words landed with more weight than she expected. That night, she did not sleep. She thought of Germany not as it was, but as it must be now. A place of absence. A place that would require rebuilding not just of walls, but of meaning. She thought of family members whose faces had begun to blur in her memory, their voices fading into the background of survival. And she thought of him, of a life that could in theory continue exactly as it was, days measured by work, not war, meals that arrived without commentary. A man who did not demand her past to dates and textbooks and black and white photographs. She would sit at the kitchen table with her grandchildren and tell them a different kind of story. Not about the camp, not about the fences, not about fear. She would begin somewhere unexpected on a stretch of land so wide it made her feel small under a sky that seemed to go on forever. She would describe the heat, the dust, the smell of animals and cut wood. She would talk about work that left her hands sore and her back aching, and how strangely that work had given her back something she thought she had lost. Then she would mention the cowboy. She always did. He was never described as a hero. She did not embellish him. She did not soften his edges or turn him into something symbolic. She spoke of him as he had been a man who wore a hat against the sun, who knew how to fix a fence, who understood animals better than people most days. She told them how he never hated her, never pitied her, never treated her like a lesson to be taught or a mistake to be corrected. He worked next to me, she would say. That was all. And somehow that was everything. Her grandchildren would lean closer, sensing there was more beneath the simplicity of her words. She would tell them how he showed her where to stand so the horse wouldn't spook, how he handed her gloves without asking if she needed them, how he shared his bread once not because he was trying to be kind, but because the day had been long and hunger was a fact, not a moral failing. She never spoke of love directly. She spoke instead of respect, of being seen without being examined, of how in the middle of a war that had demanded everyone become smaller versions of themselves, one man had insisted, without saying so, that she remain whole. When they asked her if she had been afraid, she nodded. Yes, she would say, but not in the way you think. She explained that fear had followed her across the ocean, shaped by years of lies repeated until they felt like truth. Fear had told her what Americans were supposed to be. Fear had prepared her for cruelty. What fear had not prepared her for was normal life. For a country that did not feel the need to perform its power. For people who did not confuse control with strength. As they grew older, some of her grandchildren would learn more about the war. They would read about battles and casualties, about strategies and surrender. They would ask her where she fit into all of it. She would smile faintly. I was on the losing side, she would say. But I did not lose my humanity. That was the part she wanted them to understand. That being defeated by America had not meant being broken. It had meant being confronted with the possibility that the world could function differently. That discipline could exist without cruelty, that authority did not need humiliation to sustain itself. She would tell them that when she returned to Germany, everything familiar felt fragile. Buildings could be rebuilt, roads repaired, but trust took longer. What she carried back with her was not resentment. It was a memory of a place where the enemy did not behave like an enemy at all. Sometimes when one of the children asked her why she left, why she did not stay in that we erased only that she show up for the present. The thought was intoxicating. It was also impossible. In the weeks that followed, they grew closer without naming it. Their conversations lengthened. He asked her once about a song she hummed while working. She asked him where he had learned to ride the way he did. They spoke of weather, of land, of places that existed only in memory. They did not speak of the future. When the order came, it came quietly. A list posted. Names typed in neat columns, dates assigned. Her name was there. She stood in front of the paper for a long time, reading it again and again as if it might change. That evening she found him by the fence. She told him without preamble. Going back. He nodded. Figured he said. The simplicity of his response undid her. She waited for disappointment, for persuasion, for something that would make the choice harder. None came. They stood there, the space between them, familiar now shaped by weeks of shared labor and unspoken understanding. I could stay, she said finally. The words felt heavy, dangerous. Some do. He looked at her, then really looked at her, his expression unreadable. You could, he said. But you wouldn't. She swallowed. He was right. Staying would mean living in the shadow of a war she had not finished confronting. It would mean borrowing a piece that belonged to someone else built on a foundation she had not yet helped repair. Loving him had made the truth unavoidable. He had not given her an escape. He had given her clarity. They did not kiss goodbye. They did not make promises. On her last day, he helped load supplies onto a truck. When it was time to leave, he handed her a small bundle-work gloves, worn but clean. For wherever you're headed, he said. She took them fingers, brushing his briefly. That was enough. As the truck pulled away, she did not look back. Not because she did not want to remember, but because she already did. Years later, when she would think of America, she would not think first of the camp or the uniforms or the war. She would think of a man who never tried to change her mind, and how by refusing to argue, by refusing to conquer, he had shown her a version of strength she had never been taught to recognize. A strength that did not demand loyalty. A strength that did not fear complexity. A strength confident enough to let someone walk away. That, she would come to understand, was the America of that moment. And it was what made leaving both necessary and unbearably hard. Many years later, when the war had shrunk in wide, confident country, she would pause. Because loving something does not mean you escape your responsibility, she would say. It means you carry what you learned back home. She never knew what became of the cowboy. She never learned if he married, if he stayed on that land, if he lived to see old age. He existed for her as a fixed point in time, unchanged by the years that followed. But he shaped how she told the story of America. Not as a nation that won by force alone, but as a nation so certain of itself that it did not need to strip others of dignity to prove anything. And every time she finished telling the story, no matter who was listening, no matter how many years had passed, she ended with the same sentence spoken clearly without bitterness, without regret. America didn't defeat us with weapons. It defeated the lies we were raised on. Her grandchildren would sit quietly after that, absorbing something they could not fully name. And in those moments across generations and former enemy lines, the legacy remained not as history written by victors, but as humanity remembered by those who had once been taught to fear it.